I had a really good conversation with Ian and John Height on this.
Yeah, I'm listening. Stories, bro. You're saying my things.
Previously, the stories, which have been kind of hard to get into for many of us, everyone laughs at the jailer, including me. I was like, lol, 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 lol. I did bring up the name Emmett Selk. How could I not? How could I not? I did bring up the name Emmett Selk. And so, you know, we had that. Of course I did, right? I like I say, there's no holding back here. Honesty is too important when you have these moments. But now they're kind of going to look to make a multiple expansion story arc that people can get into and be excited for the next thing. And I was like, thank.
Bro, I have been saying this since fucking Legion. The problem with World of Warcraft's story is rush. Every single story either gets completely forgotten because they don't have time to get to it, or they rush it. If you want evidence of this, look at the final patch for Battle for Azeroth. We finally get N'Zoth. N'Zoth is free. And then N'Zoth gets ended in the exact patch that he comes out in what can only be described as one of the worst, worst endings for a massive planetary threat that is N'Zoth. And I've said this for so long. What Blizzard needs is a continuous thread. So it's such good news to hear that they're finally latching onto this. You need a story, or stories, really, that you already start in Dragonflight. And those stories are gonna have moments that they sort of reach climaxes throughout the course of Dragonflight, but they're not gonna have conclusions in Dragonflight. Their conclusions are going to take place in the next expansion. And the next expansion, by the time we get these major conclusions that was already, or stories that was already started in Dragonflight, by the time their conclusions happen, you already have a bunch of new stories that is now building towards the next expansion. So you sort of have this rolling, progressive, or a rolling ball of story that just keeps building, keeps building, keeps building. So now what this allows you to do, and this is why this is such good news if Blizzard actually implements it correctly, it allows you to take seemingly unimportant stories and carry them to massive moments. So stories that in previous expansions, like for example the Loyalist campaign from Sylvanas, the Loyalist campaign should have started in BFA and then continued all the way into Shadowlands. Because here's where things would have been actually very interesting with the Loyalist campaign. Imagine if in Shadowlands, the Loyalists of Sylvanas actually still work with Sylvanas. The Loyalists are actually working with Sylvanas and Zuvul. There's a bunch of quest chains for the Loyalists where they work against the other covenants and they sort of help Zuvul. And then in patch 9.2, the Loyalists find out that Zuvul's been lying to them. Zuvul's been lying to Sylvanas, Zuvul's been lying to them. They have actually been the bad guys in all of this. Suddenly, all of it changes. You know, let's not talk about how, like, that story is bad in and of itself, but at least there, the Loyalists now feel a sense of, oh shit, are we the bad guys? You know, the story carries weight. It doesn't feel like a forgotten story that just never really started, nor did it actually end. There's an actual ending that you can now work at because you carried it through. It continued into the next expansion. So this is like probably the best news I've ever gotten for World of Warcraft. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Preach could have said nothing else. He could have just said this and I would have been happy. This is what I want. I'm sick and tired of World of Warcraft treating every single one of their expansions as an individual book that has nothing to do with the rest of the game. The expansion should be treated as chapters in a book. You have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, but all of them form part of the same book. It's working towards a story, a magnificent end to a story. And there's nothing stopping Blizzard from doing this now. Blizzard could start. Here's where things get so fucking big-brained, people. Blizzard could so easily start with a story in Dragonflight that will see its penultimate end 6 expansions from now. Can you imagine that? Imagine we get a bunch of stories in Dragonflight and we all think, oh, this is really cool. Let's just, let's just watch this. It's not, who cares? This is a great story. We're having fun, right? Then next expansion comes out. We're like, whoa. Okay, this story continues. Okay, there's more things here. The plot thickens a little. Third expansion comes out. Okay, plot thickens a lot. There's now so many more elements to the story. This story is really branching out into just a number of avenues. By expansion 6, everyone is at the edge of their fucking seat, just wondering, wait, when, what the hell is going to happen? We've had this story now for 6 expansions. We've built upon this story. It's finally coming to a head now. What is actually going to happen here? That is what I want to see for World of Warcraft. I said this way back in Legion. This is what Blizzard needs to do. We need multiple expansion stories. Stories that sort of carry over and build. Fuck! I'm glad I'm watching this because this makes me happy. This makes me happy. Andy, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the people that got the original plot would have quit. Because the people that started the game most likely because of that story. Because that's exactly what Final Fantasy does. It is quite literally what Final Fantasy does. Final Fantasy started their original story all the way back in 2.0. And it has been carrying on all the way up until Endwalker. And there are people that started playing Final Fantasy in Shadowbringers because so many people are saying, dude, the story is insane. You have to check it out. You have to see the story. So people came for the story and they stayed for the gameplay and for all other reasons. Some people stayed, some people didn't. Really doesn't matter. But stories are important and you have to give stories time to breathe, because sometimes a slowly told story that builds gradually into something big will be far more impactful than a story that starts like 2 years ago and then ends, because you get rushed storylines, you get storylines that doesn't make a lot of sense because the developers had to rush. It's all sorts of crap and no one cares about it. So I love this. This is exactly what I want to see from Blizzard moving forward. Exactly what I want to see from Blizzard moving forward.
So I had the freedom to ask these questions without worrying about what would happen going forward. So we could all be very honest. You have to be honest in these conversations. And I think that's one of the reasons I would hope that we got in there is, like I said, me and Ian have definitely not seen eye to eye on very specific niche stuff in the game, as is well known. But we both treat each other with respect and fairness and the opportunities coming through. And we've never been that abusive content creator. We're not a shill and we're not rage clicky. We've never been that. We've always been fair. So I think that's one of the reasons we got to do this, is doing that. So it's pretty good. So we get a novel per patch then. It's more about, and in fact, another person who completely spontaneously had this same idea was this wonderful man here. It's Mr. Jesse Cox. One of the things that I love about FF14 is I cannot wait for what happens next.
Oh, you spoke to JC as well? Fuck.
I really can't wait. I've been infuriated with the Hildebrand cliffhangers, let alone the MSQ. I cannot physically wait to find out what happens next. I'm frothing at the bit to find out what happens next. But I don't feel that about WoW. I don't feel that at all. Once I've done the story or whatever, I'm like, let's go. Whatever. We'll find out next. Let's wait for the next cool cutscene and stuff. So the idea that they'll be actually trying to engross us and get us into it again. GG's. Insane.
Story investment is, as the word suggests, it's about investment. Okay? I can give you the greatest story in the history of the world, unless I can get you to buy into the story, it's going to fall flat. I need to find a hook. I need to find a way for you to care about the story. Now, in movies, they do this through the character arcs. They do this through action and combat and all the rest of it. In video games, more often than not, it's a time thing. The Witcher is amazing because it requires a lot of time. It's a slow-burning game. And as you build through it, the story builds and the intrigue and the mystery builds. But it allows breathing room for those things to take hold, for you to start thinking about them, for you to start worrying about them, and then new things get introduced, and you start thinking about those, and it shapes you, and it grabs you. That's the whole point. Why is it that speculation channels are so successful in World of Warcraft? Why do I have a channel? Because it allows for investment. The game's story isn't always that good when it comes to investing players into it, but the speculation is. Because it's the what it could be. It's that moment. Now, can you imagine what speculation in World of Warcraft will be once the story gets people to invest as well? Dude, it's going to be off the charts. The amount of new people that's going to get into the story because they're invested into it. Because the story is running at a in drama, you learn about a thing called tempo. Now, tempo, for most people, just means speed. Right, or at least the speed of repetition would be tempo. In acting, tempo is everything. It's the moment that you deliver a line. It's the timing with which you deliver a line. If your timing is off by even a couple of seconds, you can take a very funny line and not make it funny at all. If your tempo is too fast, it can come across as sarcastic, where it maybe should have been endearing. If your tempo is too slow, it can come off as fake. Tempo is everything. It's the speed with which you introduce the audience to information, to happenings within a story. Tempo. If you have the wrong tempo, a story falls flat. If you're trying to, and this really is something that harkens back to a fundamental change that happened in World of Warcraft, but World of Warcraft never adapted to the change in any way, shape, or form. So Blizzard themselves refer to this as the third era of World of Warcraft, right? Now, the first era of World of Warcraft dealt with what I consider to be very two-dimensional story designs. Not two-dimensional stories. The characters were really three-dimensional. The stories were very three-dimensional. But in terms of the type of stories that they implemented was very two-dimensional. You know, you go back to TBC, the threat was singular in nature. It was the Burning Legion. It was Illidan. That was the threat. And yes, there were like side threats, but they weren't really big threats. It didn't really matter. You were there to take care of Illidan, right? That was the story. In Wrath of the Lich King, again, same thing. It's the Lich King. Sorry, you were there to take care of Illidan. In Wrath of the Lich King, you were there to take care of the Lich King, and everything was just about the Lich King and the Undead and the Scourge, and that's it. And then Blizzard sort of, around the time, I would say, of Mist of Pandaria, Blizzard starts introducing this new element of World of Warcraft storytelling, where it's no longer just about one thing. Mist of Pandaria is about the Horde v Alliance. That's the major storyline. That's the major story arc. But thrown into that, there's a little bit of old god fuckery. There's also a little bit of political intrigue with the pandas. Now the pandas are responding to us. There's also a lot of sort of infighting within the Horde. So for Horde players, we got a lot of infighting and intrigue within the Horde itself. So now you're starting to deal with very complicated story arcs, because there are multiple story arcs playing out at the exact same time. In World of Draenor, this kicks up a gear. In Legion, this kicks up a massive gear, because in Legion you're dealing with the fight between the Horde and the Alliance. You're dealing, and this is a major story arc, you're also dealing at the very same time with the Burning Legion that has just attacked. And of course there's a whole bunch of sub-stories within the Legion attacking us. And then you're also dealing with the Old God, the Old God threat, the Nightmare and all that, and the sub-stories that it created. So now you're dealing with a very convoluted story. However, your method of storytelling, your tempo, is still based on the one-dimensional design that you used to have. All of these arcs need to finish within the same expansion. And this is where Blizzard starts running into their first issues. Because how? Well, the way we'll do it is we'll introduce the Nightmare in the first patch, then we won't touch it again until the next expansion, where we'll go for the Old Gods. Okay, that at least gives us some crossover. It's not enough, but it is at least something. Although, we get the Old Gods in the first patch. There's literally zero development throughout the throughout Legion of this Old God threat. And then the Old God threat really gets kicked up a notch in BFA. But that's just the nature of it, because we have so many other story arcs. Like, we need to finish the Burning Legion story arc in this expansion, because this is Legion. This is what we're here for. So we can't spend time and effort and resources on these other smaller story arcs, because this is the big story arc and this needs to be finished. So everything else needs to be put on the back burner. This allows Blizzard to say, okay, let's get our tempo and our pacing right. We don't have to have every single patch deal with a fundamental story. We can have patches deal with elements of every single one of these stories. Get the player base involved in the story. Give the story to them in a way that keeps them interested in the story. Not too fast, not too slow, just right. If Blizzard nails this, boys, if Blizzard nails this, WoW is in for a treat, because the WoW story is good. The WoW universe is good. It just requires room to breathe. So if they can nail this, if they can get it right, we're in for a treat.